Welcome to the Everyday PM podcast, the podcast where we discuss project management principles for your everyday life. My name is Campea, and I am a veteran project manager, having worked in all kinds of industries from tech and now working as the VP of operations for a marketing agency called TrueSense. I am so excited to welcome our guest. And for those of you who have been following the podcast, you may be familiar with him. And for those of you who have not, we will take a moment to briefly introduce Greg. But I am excited to welcome back to the podcast Greg Christensen, who is now, I think, I was just telling him before we started this episode, the CMMS radio guru. He is the podcast host. He is all things CMMS. And he has come on our podcast a few times to talk about project management. He has built incredible things in his previous professional journey as it relates to project management. And he has a genuine interest and love for our profession as well. So with all that being said, Greg, I don't want to do your introduction a disservice. So Greg, welcome to the podcast. And if you can, take a brief moment to introduce yourself to our audience.
Well, first of all, Anne, thanks for having me back on. And it's always fun connecting with you. And I think for me, the intro is great. And my interest in like podcasting kind of connects to part of your journey because I remember when you dropped your first, your 1 year announcement. And I thought, wow, this is cool. And then we started talking about project management. So for me, background, CMMSRadio is a podcast about computerized maintenance management software. I tend to focus on the two M's in the middle, which is maintenance management, the maintenance mindset. So it's about software, but it's really more about people and process first, and then the technology on top of it. I'll bring in random things every now and then. You'll see some content coming pretty soon that doesn't necessarily relate to the space, but it actually does. And I'm always trying to do that kind of cool stuff. And I just enjoy connecting with people. That's part of the reason I do it. And I was in the maintenance management and computerized maintenance management software space for many years. And, I had to try with some project management technology that we still have. It's just sitting on a shelf, taking a nap, waiting for its comeback. So I'm just happy to be here with you. You always make me smile and happy, and we can just talk about whatever. So I'm here ready to jump into it.
Here we go. I think our topic is pretty fluid today, but before we get into CMMS, how it relates to project management, I think I want to take a second to, and I didn't prompt you about this, Greg, but I want to give you your flowers where they're due because Greg joined the podcast. Gosh, it's got to have been over a year ago, maybe even longer than that, as a fan of the podcast. He's come on and we've done PM coffee chats together. I think that's even one of my more popular episodes was having you on just asking basic project management questions. But in time, not only have Greg and I established a relationship, but I have now kind of taken the backseat to watch Greg's journey into the podcasting space. In particular, he has really cemented himself as a leader in the CMMS space. Since he has been on the podcast, he has his own podcast, which I encourage everybody to check out. He is a fantastic host. And I remember the first time we met and spoke, I told him, you have a voice for radio, which he totally does. He would argue that he doesn't have the face for TV, but I also think he also has the face for video. And he's been at multiple conferences. He spoke as a key speaker on panels. He has now over 2,000 followers on LinkedIn, just in the CMMS group itself. Not to mention, if you connect with Greg, which I encourage all of you to connect with him on LinkedIn. He is so supportive and active in that space. And I guarantee you that as soon as you make that connection with Greg, he's going to be there seeing your posts, championing your posts, responding to your posts. And I couldn't have been as fortunate and lucky to have had somebody find my podcast, create the connection, and now watch how amazing of a journey Greg has made on his own to establish himself in his own community. And for all of that, I just give you all the flowers, Greg, because it's just been a fun ride to kind of take the backseat and watch all that happen for you.
Well, that's a lot to take, and people that really know me and whether they see me on the podcast or meet me in person, I always have kind of a visceral reaction to those kinds of things because I want to stay really grounded and it's touching and I really appreciate that. And I tell people, "Hey, I'm an ogre," and they're like, "Why would you say that?" I'm like, "No, what I mean is I'm banging around doing my thing, and then when we get into stuff like this, I'm just like a marshmallow inside, and I dig that stuff, and it's cool having real human connection that most of us might have thought is just not even possible through this medium, let alone you know other ways we meet people. So it's awesome. I appreciate those kind words,
Of
and
course.
it's a lot to take. It's very humbling. So thank you for that, Anne.
Of course, of course, of course. So let's get into CMMS, as Greg has included as part of his introduction. He focuses more on the double M right in the middle. But why don't you break down CMMS for us a little bit further, just for those that aren't too familiar with it? And then we'll kind of get into how the projects work in that space and try to make that connection between your particular area of interest and our podcast audience as well.
Yeah. So just a general, real basic, kind of high level introduction to CMMS. It's computerized maintenance management software. You could also say computerized maintenance management system. And think of it in terms of work order management plus asset management. And what we mean is everybody, for the most part, with any kind of facilities of any kind, almost any size, has work requests and things that come in, whether they're complaints or issues that have to be taken care of. And we start with writing all that stuff down. Well, these are solutions that allow you to digitize it and start your digital transformation. So, as you do more and more of that, you need better tracking. You need to see who, what, why, and where, what's really been going on. Now, I mentioned asset management and managing equipment. We're talking specifically about equipment. So, work orders tend to be connected to things that people are going to go attend to. So, those are the two main areas of what a maintenance management solution of any kind is going to manage for a facility. It could be a school, it could be a hospital, it could be an entire campus of office buildings. It could be oil and gas. It could be rigs out in the ocean, all these different things. So it starts to become a really, really big world. And what really centralizes it is maintenance management because at the end of the day, the reason we want this digitization and we have to track all these things as it relates to maintenance is maintenance really, in my opinion, makes the world go around. So think of this, and I'll kind of relate it. I don't know how soon the episode will come out, but right now we have a heat wave. It's not just in Southern California, it's across the US. Much of the US is experiencing this. So when people say, well, talking about maintenance management and work orders and things that people take care of, I would say, well, let's boil it down. Let's forget about business for a second. Let's just go home. We got air conditioning units,
Mhm.
right? We need those during the heat. And if those things fail, then we've got serious problems. So the systems that track that kind of work, even at that level, and then we go back into the business environment, right? Your factories, your plants, your schools, like I said, nonprofits, hospitals, all these things. We got to track all this stuff, not only to get stuff done, but to see where we're having problems. And then that starts to take us on another part of the journey where we're thinking of maintenance and reliability best practices, how we can create more availability of the assets that produce the things that we sell, and all that kind of stuff. So it really starts to spin out. That's why I like the subject because it's specific yet broad.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think in your telling or your overview, you kind of get elements of both, right? You can really hone in on a particular part, or you can kind of look at it, and the application of it sounds like is pretty broad in terms of where you've seen it implemented. And I think that is also, as you had mentioned, a great correlation to project management in general, as well as we've all learned all types of industries require the role. And as things go with the software we use, sometimes it is a little bit more niche, whereas in the way you've explained CMMS, sounds like really any organization could pick this up if they needed to.
I think they could. I want people to be a little bit cautious about that. And this is what's also nice about me no longer being a part owner of a CMMS solution provider. So now I can
Hmm.
be agnostic and really say, look, let's take that extra step back and say, do you really need this or not? Because the idea that
That's a
everybody
great
needs
point.
it, it's a great idea, but there are situations where they might not. Now that can change over a period of time, but the way it really relates to project management, at least in my view, is if we agree just to placehold it for our session today. I don't know why I call it a session, but uh,
It's
if
therapy, Greg.
yeah, it's maintenance therapy, right? And project therapy. So everything's a project in one way or another. And I think that's a bit of a stretch, but if we look at maintenance and maintenance management, these are like little projects. A work order, we got to do this. Something pops up for preventive maintenance. Something pops up, we're going to rip and replace a piece of equipment, whatever the case may be, right? Well, in project management, we have projects that are based on deliverables and timelines and deadlines, and
Hmm.
those have similarities. But what happens in project management is it touches this area constantly, not just with getting the software, setting up the deployment plan, and then a project manager. You and I did an episode on that where you're walking down the hall one day and somebody says, "Hey, good luck with that CMMS rollout," and you're like,
Right.
okay, what's
Yeah.
that?" And this is how it goes. But within facilities management, maintenance management, all these things, there are constant projects. And the most critical component of those projects is that they get done on time, efficiently, on budget, all those things. So that lands right in your wheelhouse, regardless of what it is.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I know that we wanted to talk a little bit about what a typical CMMS project looks like, and you're kind of already going into that as we're chatting here. And I think I love that you have now positioned yourself in a much more less biased space, so to speak, so that you can really give your honest opinion around whether or not CMMS is applicable for a particular community or organization or people, right? I'd like to say the same thing goes for project management. I have lived through experiences where some organizations have said, let's grab project management, they can come in and fix everything. I don't know if this is applicable in your space as well, but there's always this kind of misconception around what a project management team can come in and do. I believe, obviously, so much in our profession that I believe we can do anything as it relates to helping an organization be more efficient. But to your earlier point, I also would say that even within project management, sometimes some organizations may not need it, or they think they're looking for project management, whereas they're looking for something else. And so I'm glad that you have now found yourself in a place where you can be very, very transparent about having those types of conversations. Do you think that having now removed yourself from feeling like you're selling a product, constantly selling a product, has that helped you kind of in terms of not just doing your podcast and having those conversations, but just seeing the entire space of CMMS a little bit differently?
100%, no two ways about it, whether it be the space itself or what's really happening within. So one of the reasons I always tell people I'm about the maintenance management or the mindset in the middle is that's where it really unfolds. Human beings and the kind of conversations I can have are not that I didn't have great ones previously, but now they're wide open, and a lot of people are starting to understand that I'm not here to hurt anybody. It's the exact opposite. I want to actually help users navigate their journey. I want to help people avoid doing unnecessary rip and replace from one piece of software to another if they really don't need to. I want to help the right consultants get working with the right people. So I want to work with people that are super real, and I can have those conversations now. And I can't even tell you what we talk about off mic. It's it's awesome. It's brilliant. And those are kind of buzzy words that everybody uses, but when you really connect with an industry and they know that you don't necessarily have an outcome goal, like you're not selling something, but you're just trying to help, it makes all the difference. So it's true that that change made a difference. Doesn't mean later that I won't have something to sell, but I also happen to be somehow, I don't know if it's hardwired, but somehow wired to deliver on value rather than just selling stuff.
That I think helps with the now authenticity in what you're doing in terms of having those realistic conversations. I think sometimes people will immediately jump to the solution. And to your point, maybe this is not the solution for you. And I think in terms of project types, right, CMMS projects, what are some of those questions that you're asking people who are interested in the platform or the software? What are some of those questions you're asking them to really tease out if this is going to be a value add to their organization?
So what we typically want to do, if now there's some things that need to be set up first. So for example, how did we get in touch with this person in the first place? So if someone goes and they think they need a solution and they type something into some form, they're just going to get bombed left and right. But let's forget all that. And now I'm talking to someone. I want to ask them questions about their operations, their operational style. So for example, when it comes to day-to-day management of your work orders and the labor associated with the work that needs to get done, or the pieces of equipment that you're trying to protect, track, and manage, or flip those around any way you want,
Hmm.
where are you currently seeing gaps? What the problem with that kind of a question is, it's self-diagnosing. So we want to be really careful with self-diagnosing questions, because
Sure.
now if we're supposed to influence someone's decision to make their situation better, it's much more important that we find out not just where the pain is. Everybody's selling to pain and all that. Forget about that. You got to find the value and connect it to the business. So, better questions when it comes to discovery and figuring out whether somebody really needs a CMMS might be something to the effect of, have you missed work that needed to be done, critical work that caused any kind of failure that hurt the bottom line, took operations down? For example, if we want to go simplistic with facilities management, have you had any air conditioning failures in the last 3 months that could have been prevented by doing better PMs and changing
Mm,
filters, as opposed to a full day or two of people having to go home because it's dangerously hot outside? And what
sure.
did that really cost you? Now, again, I'm generalizing, right? But those are the kinds of things we want to get into. So, at a base level, if someone does not have a maintenance management system or software, and maybe they're just using Excel or spreadsheets, we want to find out if that's actually causing a negative impact to the business. Because if it's not, then they might not need a system. They really might not. And a lot of people out there might hate me saying that, but if you don't need one, you don't need one. Don't get one.
Hmm.
But you
Hmm.
eventually might, if you're going to continue to grow and you're going to get busier and busier, and asset criticality plays a role in what you do. So, as you can tell, each time we get one of these questions and we try to carve it up, it's really hard to resolve it in just like quick phraseology. Is there such a thing as phraseology?
There might be
I'm
now.
I'm coining it now. Yeah. So with regards to how we describe and interpret things, when you get away from the selling aspect and you look more from a helping perspective and you stay extremely curious, I want to understand you and what you're doing. So say the operation you're at now, and I wanted to understand how you guys move through the world from a facilities perspective.
Hmm.
The more we talk about that, I start finding places to look and see if you have a real problem that has a root cause that impacts the business negatively.
Gotcha.
Because
Yeah.
if none of that happens, you don't need anything to solve it. If there's not a problem, there's nothing to solve.
It sounds like, when you go to a doctor's office and they ask you a few initial questions in the intake of you seeing that the
Mhm.
physician is, and then sometimes they just pass you off to a PA or something, right? Because they're like, oh, this person doesn't really need to see the main MD. But as things go, it sounds like you do a lot of that inquiry ahead of time. So that way you are prescribing what feels right for that particular customer. Because as I said, I wear two hats now, project management as well as operations. And even then, the line can be very gray between the two of them because you've got awesome team of people who want to execute well and deliver projects on time within budget to scope, whatever the parameters may be. But then you've got on the operations side this need to make sure that in our delivery we are able to track things from what you're calling a work order, but what would be our initial project request or initiation all the way to execution of what that particular project can be. And within that, you want to understand what are those gaps, opportunities to make things a little bit more efficient. And when you talk about CMMS, the correlations are exactly there in terms of what the project types look like. I know you said it doesn't really apply to all industries or all people, but it can come in as a value add solution. So I want to kind of get one more level deeper than that to truly understand how you facilitate the project through, and what are some of the KPIs you are then trying to quantify to tell your client or customer, hey, you implementing this CMMS into your organization is actually a value add. So I know that was a very long-winded way to say, Greg, break it down for me. And then how are you then showing the value add at the end of the project?
Okay, so one of the things that is often missing from a question like that is we need a little bit more specificity on industry. So we're going to generalize a little bit just so that I can kind of describe it at a super high level, not meant to solve everybody's
Of
problems. It's
course.
just to get us all
Yes.
thinking.
Yes.
So we're going to have a facility setting that is an office park. It's 3 buildings. You decide how big they are. It doesn't matter. I mean, it does. It actually does. But I'm saying for our story today. And when we go to set up our CMMS, and we're going to make some assumptions, they've already done their own, say, for example, root cause analysis. They've done a lot of
Sure.
assessment, and they know that they need a CMMS, and we've got one. We've provided one. We've got the decision. It's signed. It's time to deploy. So when it comes to that deployment, the very first step is to iron out and decide exactly how that solution is going to match what physically is there at this site.
Okay.
So, most typically, in my view, this would be a site that has 3 buildings. Each building has floors, there's grounds, parking lot, etc. We want to set all that up. Then we want to start putting in things like where are the pieces of equipment, the ones that we're really going to focus on initially. Because if somebody goes into this going, every piece of equipment before we use the system, that's not going to work. Start with your big rocks, criticality, right?
Mm-hmm.
For the milestones during this project, what we want to do as the CMMS provider is we want to gate, so to speak, with steps or process update intervals what has been done so far. So you signed up, we deployed what the site is, the buildings, the areas by floor level or section. We started putting in some pieces of equipment, categorizing equipment, building out service types. So that might be the first set of things that we set up, and we've got some top level users that are getting trained. Milestone
Okay.
number 1, we've done our initial steps. Milestone number 2, putting it in the hands of actual users, including the technical or the maintenance technicians and people on site, chief building engineer, et cetera, that's going to utilize the platform. Make sure they've done that and both groups have been trained. That's milestone number 2, generalizing. Milestone number 3 is going to tend to be, can we look back and see that we've actually not just set all this up, but we've gotten appropriate user adoption to develop data? And this should all happen depending on your organization size and the complexity of the environment, the nature of their savviness using solutions, mobile, all that kind of thing. That's probably anywhere from, I'd say, 6 weeks to 6 months, depending on organization size. But you're not done yet. What happens most of the time during this phase, this 1, 2, and 3 kind of check-in spots, that's where it falls apart because too many organizations select a solution, and the other organizations that sell them the solution, it it becomes about finding and selecting the software and never deploying it. Also, other things to watch out for during that period of time is turnover on either side.
Mm-hmm.
So if we lose champions, if I'm a
Yeah.
CMMS provider and I lose some champions and people that are really all about this project and they move on, go to a different job, win the lottery, whatever, God forbid what else, that's going to be disruptive and it could cause a failure in the project success, the likelihood of project success. So That's just generally speaking. And you can tell I'm trying to hold myself back because
I appreciate
I
it.
can, I can really, really go through and explain all kinds of different projects, and it might be overwhelming because I'm starting to go really fast. So basically, that's the thing we want to look at is, did we select it? Now have we started to deploy it? Have we started to use it? And then we want as soon as possible to see what is our data looking like so we can reassess in case we've missed
Mm.
something.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're
Mm-hmm.
going to do that again and again. It's never going to stop. This is
Continuous.
CMMS utilization, selection and utilization is an ongoing thing. Once you've selected, the utilization and the check-in and managing those KPIs is a constant.
Yeah. Yeah. I imagine so. And I, like many, have gone through these types of software implementations where there's all these expectations around what's going to be the value add, how soon can we see the ROI in this investment. You had mentioned already that CMMS is not for every industry, but for some, right? And so I think where I want to go with this question is around, I've seen software implementations where it just sounds like this is going to be the one size fits all, fixes everything solution. Organizations really try to promote it only to find they're only using about 30% of the actual features of the software. And then they ask the question about, well, we made this investment in CMMS. We thought we were going to get this. How come we're only getting, maybe 10% of what we expected, the efficiencies that we were going to gain from this platform? So what do you say to those people who kind of find themselves in this space of, they made this investment, they had some expectations around it, albeit maybe unrealistic expectations? What are you doing now in this part of the conversation?
Okay. So if I'm the provider of the solution
Yes.
and that's what's being brought to me, I want as quickly as possible for us to get some people together and go back and take a look and find the clues as to where this in a sense went off the rails. So remember I mentioned if we lose our champion, if we lose people that are bought in to the utilization of the platform, that will change everything. It's almost like starting over. Very difficult for the customers, and it's very difficult for the CMMS providers
Yeah.
to reconcile that because people don't believe that it could be on them for not using and proceeding with their deployment.
Hmm.
So that's where I would look first. And once we assess that, then we pick up the ball, so to speak, and keep running it forward. We want to retrain and plug those gaps as it relates to their utilization of the platform, because it doesn't take much in the way of disengagement to now see a solution like this sit on a shelf, collect dust, and cost immense amounts of money.
Yeah.
I've heard things in the millions that are just shocking.
Wow. Wow.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And I don't want to call out any solutions because it's on both sides. You know,
Yes, of
like
course.
right now, I kind of want to tell everybody, users, if you have a CMMS platform, you need to reach out to your vendor and say, hey, teach me how to use this. Where are we going wrong? What have we missed? Vendors, if you don't know how to do that for your client, maybe you've had your own turnover, just improve it. It's totally possible. Get somebody that can help your people be better for your clients. Everybody's in this to win.
Yeah.
So buyers of, owners of, people that have solutions and they're not using them, take a step back and figure it out. It's not just because it's clunky and junky. That's oftentimes not the case.
Yeah.
It's because people don't know why they're supposed to be using this.
Yeah.
So and now you can see this is where it all comes down to culture, the way our teams are assembled and how we all buy in. Just like when you run a project, if you have a project that half the people or even 10, 12, 15% of the people are just not into, that's very high risk
Yeah.
because everybody else is going to have to do the lifting and they're going to be the bottleneck that you cannot even exploit. So this happens in all areas of all organizations. So that's why I say I can spin out, and now we're talking about all kinds of crazy stuff.
Me
So
too,
sorry.
because no, don't apologize, because in the same way, this conversation has already kind of veered way different than the outline, but it's because it's interesting in that you could take everything you just said, remove CMMS, and it's still highly applicable to people who have lived in this operation space, who have lived in change management, who have lived in project management, who have lived in software implementation, who currently live in PM or CMMS worlds. Just take some of the specificity out of what Greg just said, and it's highly applicable and even relatable to, I'm sure, the experiences that many of us have had around having to deal with not just software, but the elements of bringing in people who have to be involved in championing the change, and how important and critical that is to making sure that you end up getting the value that you're supposed to get back from implementing a system like CMMS. So I think for what it's worth, Greg, I know you went into the details, but I needed to tease that out because I want to make sure people understand what Greg is saying is very relatable. I'm sure a lot of you are nodding your heads as you're listening to what he's saying. And I appreciate you keeping it very general for the fact that we can correlate it very easily to other lived experiences outside of the CMMS world. So I was curious in terms of now kind of just trying to tie in PM with CMMS in a much more obvious way, how a PM might complement CMMS, whether it's the implementation of a CMMS or something else. And how do you think that the role might clash in any way with CMMS? I think I will preface that by saying I wanted to ask you a question around the evolving technology, as well as how maybe AI is involved in this type of conversation. But to your point, Greg, we will spin off and talk about something very, very different if I ask that question. So let's keep it here and ground it around PM, CMMS. How do they correlate? How do they not?
Okay, so the correlation primarily revolves around the idea that we're trying to accomplish something by a deadline. There's something at stake. We have something that has to be done. So, in the world of CMMS and within the platform and within maintenance management within any organization, it is quite probable that a project manager will be involved in something like, let's say, a very large piece of equipment that's going to go through a change out within overall operations of the facility or of
Mhm.
production or anything like that. So a project manager knows exactly what to do about how to set that up, and they're going to possibly leverage the CMMS, the maintenance management software, to see and track some of the things about that, whether they have separate project management software or not. But they're going to be involved because they have the skills, the insights, the training. They might even be a PMP, and they know how to set up and plan and execute a project. So that's where there's a lot of similarities between what people that use CMMS are doing and then people within the org that probably need to interact with it and get something done really, really well. The way
So
they, yeah.
before you get to the way that they might clash,
Hmm.
if I'm a project manager and I work in a production facility, maintenance facility, and there's a piece of equipment or machinery that is very, very critical to our business. It's this piece we've invested in, but we know it's been about 10 years since we've updated that piece of machinery. So, as a PM, is it that I'm flagging, hey, everyone, I think we're almost at the 10-year marker. As I know from knowledge of being in this space, we might want to start having conversations around replacement or updating of the machinery. What's the downtime or potential impact, negative impacts to our business? I'm looking at the schedule to see if we decide to upgrade the machinery or replace it, what is that going to impact from our production standpoint? Are those some of the things that I'm thinking about and trying to ask questions around as it pertains to how we would be working together in this space?
I would say yes, but I would flip it completely backwards.
Oh, okay.
So, so this would be more your operations hat saying, I see a potential problem here. I was looking at this in, let's say, our CMMS platform and the KPIs that you've already set it up to track for you, the ones that tell you something to go and look further. And now you've reached out to the project manager to say, I'm seeing a problem over here and I'm not sure when we're going to do something about it, but I want to start to build my plan as to what would make sense for us as an entire team. Can you give me an idea of what the resource loading is on your side from a project management perspective? Maybe it's somebody in the PMO where
Yes.
they can tell you, hey, this is where we're looking. And great, I was just looking for a potential gap where we might find some of those resources, because I have a feeling in the next 12 to 18 months we might replace this machine. And then you would add to it, before we even do that, we're going to do root cause analysis, assess the criticality, figure out if that machine really in fact needs to be replaced versus improved, because sometimes there's defects that can be eliminated on an existing machine as opposed to replacing it. So
Sure.
I would say backwards. The
I
project
love that.
manager doesn't look for projects, as opposed to, in this scenario, they need a project manager to run the project, even if the project manager is only going to be an overseer and do that load balancing on the resources, the timing, the parts, the
Mm-hmm.
supply
Mm-hmm.
chain, the concept of full kitting. You would be amazed. You would be amazed how similar everything we're talking about in maintenance management, maintenance and reliability best practices, and all those match up almost identical to the project execution maturity model. And that concept of full kitting is everywhere. People
That's
that
awesome.
use it don't know that it's happening right next door in the department next to them. And
Yeah,
it is one of the number one things on something like that that would set you up for success in a project like that. So
that makes
I know I
sense.
spun out a little bit, but
Hey, I had mentioned there's this whole gray area now that I find myself in operations and project management. So I always appreciate Greg for setting me straight in terms of my thinking, but I got it. I just had it in reverse, right? So now
oh yeah.
let's now get to your point around how the role of PM may clash in any way with CMMS, if you see any kind of negative outcomes coming from that.
So if there's going to be any kind of a clash between, let's say, a CMMS project and the people that are really truly leveraging the CMMS, although it's for the benefit of the organization, with project managers, a project manager, or even the entire PMO,
Hmm.
that is typically going to boil down to a combination of things. One, it could be the culture and misalignment between the culture. So they don't understand and buy in on each other's why. I'm always going to fall back on that, because
Yeah.
that's a guaranteed area where you can fix almost anything. Because when the why is there, a lot of the other stuff doesn't matter. They don't even care how hard it is. They're just all about it, straight up. I'm just,
Yeah.
I'm just calling it like it is there. The other thing is, when they're not communicating, they may think that they're in opposition when they're not. And although that goes back to the first thing I mentioned, but if it doesn't make sense, say for example, fiscally for one department versus another,
Hmm.
that's very difficult to resolve. And then when you remember I was talking about the load balancing on resources, available
Right.
labor, skill set, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's another thing that can create a hidden kind of fire breathing dragon when it
Hmm.
comes to, if our resources are completely clogged and we know we've got priorities and something new just came in, that can cause a lot of stress, unnecessary stress, but real stress, right? So maybe it's actually necessary. So that's where some of the conflict can come in. I do think project management and maintenance management, as far as I look back over the last 20 plus years, they play pretty well together. They really they in my experience. Now, my experience is only my own,
Hmm.
with, whatever number of companies. And I do hear other things out throughout the industry about these kind of conflicts. So I don't think we're going to have like a pure magic bullet takeaway. You also mentioned something earlier about this one size fits all.
Hmm.
That kind of stuff it's not out there.
I bet you a little like irk came in as I was saying that, but I think it's definitely something that we both have to deal with in our respective spaces quite a bit
Mm.
and make sure that we are having those very open and transparent conversations with people who are interested in it. I mean, the same thing goes when I meet new people who are telling me, "Hey, I'm really interested in project management. Can you tell me about how I can get into the industry?" And before I even start a conversation with them, outside of saying hello and introductions, is let me ask you a few questions just to make sure this is actually where you want to be.
You
Because
did
I
that with
think
me.
there is a very big misconception around that, right? People have this idea, which I'm sure they do with CMMS too, which the one size fits all comment came from. So we have to make that, we're fighting the same battle, I think, just in different places.
Yeah. I tend to agree, and look, for everybody's benefit, when I say that there's not a one size fits all, there's no such thing as a magic silver bullet. That that's meant to help you because that's the reality,
Hmm.
and that's not supposed to be a bad thing. It's just with a bit more specificity, and when people are providing a CMMS to somebody, understand what those folks are really trying to do, where their pain is, and don't try to dictate. And then on the other side, if you're looking for solutions, be mindful and careful when there is something that's cookie cutter and it's not a perfect fit. But at the same time, if you're
Yeah.
85% plus, I would say most of the time it's good to go. So this is where this gray area just keeps coming up
Yeah.
constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Greg, to end our conversation, I'm very curious about now having kind of really put your position out in terms of being a leader at the forefront of some of the innovations that are happening in CMMS. What is that thing? What's that next evolution of CMMS? Um, I'm not going to make any assumptions there, so I'll just put the question mark at the end of that statement.
Sure. Sure. No, that's a good one because there's a lot of ambiguity out there. There's a lot of new shiny stuff out there, and I talk about shiny stuff, but I tell people don't take the bait because we still got to wait and see. So I just did a panel discussion at a conference. It's called the Reliable Plant Conference. It took place out in Chicago. It was a couple weeks ago, and I don't think you and I have talked about it after. I told you ahead of time I was going. However,
Yes.
we did a panel on the evolution of CMMS,
Oh, perfect
and
timing
in
for my
order
question then.
Yes, yes. And what came out of that panel, and we're going to release the footage on the panel in a couple of weeks, but what really came out of that was we started focusing in on the people and the failure to evolve with the technology. And that's not a failure on the part of the people necessarily. So don't take that the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
What I think is really coming is we're going to have more improvements there where people start to embrace a little bit more of the technology, and they're not necessarily going to be so advanced with the next new shiny thing. But what's coming as far as next is further understanding of AI, artificial intelligence, which right now, make no mistake, is very surface level and not necessarily what you may think it is. And I can say that because I know that's true, and I'm not beholden to anybody. I'm
Mm-hmm.
beholden to telling the truth.
Yeah.
So that's not to tear anybody down, but AI is going to continue to learn and improve. And some of the technology companies out there are probably going to, fold up and become better and better. But that's so from an AI perspective. We also have related to that the Internet of Things or industrial Internet of Things, where we're looking at sensor monitoring and those types of things. I think that's going to
Oh,
improve.
that's
But what I mean by improving is over the next 12 to 24 months, I think people are going to know more of what is really working, and some of those other things are going to go away. And it's like I'm excited because I want to get closer to the truth and find what's really working.
sure.
And I don't want to call out what's not in a hard way. I just want to get people looking at what actually works. And I've got some cool episodes coming up about that in the next
Nice.
like 2 to 3 months.
Oh,
So
that's super exciting. That's super
yeah, I
exciting.
hope that was helpful. I know I'm
Yes.
dancing around it, but
No, and the same thing goes for PM, right? We're still trying to figure out this whole impact of AI in terms of our profession and what I would like to say innovations are going to be made in terms of how we how we work with systems like CMMS, how we even just execute projects, how we do our jobs. So I'm glad that you touched on AI without me having to just ask you about it, because I had a feeling there was going to be some influence that was happening in the trends in the CMMS space. So appreciate that too, Greg. And we look forward to seeing the snippets or the clips or whatever it is you're going to release of that panel as well.
Yeah, that'll be coming pretty soon. So I'm looking forward to it. Two different panels, two different events,
Nice.
both really. I mean, the guests on the panel, it's not me. It's got nothing to do with me. It's the people.
Stop it.
It's true. It's true. You'll see. You'll see.
Well, I am, like I said, very appreciative of all that you have done to support the Everyday PM podcast. We are, this community is as supportive of you as you have been of us. And I'm excited to see what's next for you in your space. And I'm always here to support you in your journey. And I look forward to more conversations like this, Greg, because again, I can just talk to you for forever, but I know we've got time to get back to what we do on a regular day to day. So Greg, for those of you that want to continue the conversation with you, where can they find you online?
I would say, first of all, on LinkedIn, find the CMMS Radio company page and connect there. That's all smushed together. Don't put a space between CMMS and radio. Smush it all together. So company page there. And then you can find me on LinkedIn as well, connect and, hit me up. We'll have a conversation. No obligation. I'm not selling nothing. And I'm just here to help the maintenance management world, CMMS and all that. Just be better. And I want to learn stuff too. I don't know everything. I never will. I just want to know more.
Well, thank you for all that you do, Greg. And I feel like I've learned a lot in this short conversation we've had, as so has the audience that's listening in on this episode. So best of luck in all that you do. I will look forward to seeing more come out from any panels or any other speaking engagements you have. Everyone go support Greg and everything that he's doing over there in the CMMS world. You can also find me on LinkedIn as well. There's the Everyday PM group on LinkedIn. Not as active as Greg's, but definitely exists there for you to create a little community with other project managers. You can connect with me on LinkedIn as well. So that will do it for Greg and I in this installment of the Everyday PM podcast. I appreciate all of you for tuning in. Feel free to like, subscribe, leave a great comment on any of the episodes of the Everyday PM on any of the podcasting platforms that you may be listening in on. So for Greg and I, everyone, take care, and we'll see you at the next episode.
Thank you, Anne.